Welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Come with us as we connect the pro-life movement's past to present, uncover hidden or forgotten history, and its connections to the battle still raging today. Now, here's our host, Danielle Underwood.
This episode is recommended for mature audiences. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. We're so grateful to all of our listeners who joined us in season 1. We took a quick break to kind of get ourselves ready to go for season 2, and we're back. And we have some amazing stories lined up for you, starting with today. I just want to kind of flag for you all, if you have not heard yet about our banquets coming up on April 11th and 12th in Overland Park in Wichita, we would love to see you there. We will be featuring Seth Dillon, CEO of the Babylon Bee, as our featured speaker, and I highly recommend you join us. It's going to be an amazing evening, and we would love to see you there. So make sure, get your tickets at kfl.org, and when you're there, come up to me, find me and introduce yourself, and I would love to hear what you think of our podcast. So today, before I introduce my guest, I want to know what you think when you hear the word quitter. Because if you're like me, you probably were taught that being a quitter was not a good thing, that you are not to stop before you cross that finish line. It was always full steam ahead, let's go. But I'm here to say that after you hear from our guest today, you're going to rethink what you know about the word quitter and realize that it's actually the most beautiful word in the English language. So now that I've got your attention and you're wondering where this is going, I would love to introduce my guest today, Kelly Lester. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, how are you?
Very good. I'm so glad that you are with us here today on the podcast. Kelly, you are the outreach director for And Then There Were None. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
All right.
I'm a quitter.
And you're a quitter and proud of it. So we're going to find out exactly why. Kelly, you grew up in a Christian family, but experienced trauma at a young age. And you know, from what I know of your story, this led you kind of in a downward spiral into this, it feels like this circle of pain and attempts to cope with that pain in all the ways that you could figure out what you might try on your own. And as we know, that is so often just a really difficult path. And, through a series of choices that we're going to talk about today, you ended up working on the payroll for the abortion industry. But your story did not end there. And I'm just thrilled to have you here. And I am already humbled by just to meet a woman of such amazing character and a story of beautiful redemption. So I just want to say, start us at the beginning. Take us back. How did your story first begin?
Yeah, so you did it. That was a perfect intro for my story. I should have you follow me around and do intros everywhere because I love that so much. But from the outside, my family and my childhood looked perfect. I had my two parents were married up until the point when my father passed away recently. We had that 2.3 children. We lived in a nice neighborhood on the golf course. But I can remember from a very young age, 3, 4 years old, doing inappropriate things with dolls. And I don't mean just experimental type things. I mean actual acts that no 3 or 4-year-old should know. And my mom walking into the room, seeing me do those things, and instantly feeling shame. And not knowing necessarily what that was, but now I can look back, and recognize that emotion. And then when I was in elementary school at the bus stop, the kids made fun of me, they teased me, I was bullied, and felt, again, that shame, didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, felt like I was worthless, felt like I was a bad kid because of what had happened as a child, which I later recognized I was molested by a family member. I was very shy, painfully shy. and just didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. And then in high school, some friends came over and said, hey, Kelly, there's a party tonight. Let's sneak out and go to this party, which I thought that was something you just saw in TV shows. I didn't know that was something people actually did. But I said, okay, we'll sneak out and go to a party. And we did. And while we were at the party, a popular boy comes over to me and asked me to go for a walk. And I was like, oh gosh, he really likes me. And it was the first real attention that I'd gotten from a guy. And so I thought, well, this is going to be, oh, he likes me, it'll be great. We went on the walk, and while we were on the walk, he raped me. And came back to the party, I got my friends, went home, and the next morning told them what happened. And their response was, Kelly, why would he do that to you? He could have anybody he wants. And I felt that shame. I'm not even worthy of that, like that kind of a feeling. And then a couple of weeks later, I went to my youth pastor, told her what had happened. And her response was, well, Kelly, if you'd never snuck out and gone to that party, that would have never happened. And so then again, I'm bad. It's my fault. I felt that shame. And I didn't know what to do necessarily, but I knew that I didn't belong anywhere. And I felt like I wanted love. I was looking for love and looking for attention. And I found that with young men. And by the time I was 15, I was pregnant. And I already had an early acceptance to college. I started high school early. I already had early acceptance to college. I was, playing tennis. And so I went to my boyfriend's mother, because she was someone that I'd known my whole life. She was like our team mom for our softball team. She was the PTA president. And so I knew her very well. And I went to her and told her that I was pregnant. And she said, no problem, we will take you and we'll get an abortion. I didn't understand the ins and outs of what I was saying yes to. I didn't understand the procedure. I didn't understand the risks. I didn't understand any of that. But I very much knew that I was pregnant and I did not want to be. And this was the answer. And I trusted her because, again, she was a leader in our community. She was a leader in her church. She was kind of the ideal woman. She was, it was a career woman, but had a family. And so when she said, this is the best thing for you, I said, you've got to be right. Let's go do that. And so at 15, I walked into the abortion facility alone with a wad of cash and had my first abortion. And I don't remember much from that day because of the sedation appointment. But the next day I woke up and I knew in my heart of hearts that God would never be able to forgive me for what I had done, because I knew that I had killed my child. And being a mom was something that I'd always wanted to be. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have really done the unpardonable sin. God will never forgive me for this. And so I turned my back on God and I turned my back on everything good that was in my life. I walked in a nationally ranked tennis player, a straight A student, a regular church attender. I walked out of that abortion facility and ran from all of those things. Barely ended up graduating high school, even though I already had early acceptance. Quit playing tennis almost immediately, refused to go to church, and turned to drugs and alcohol. And started drinking very heavily, started doing very heavy drugs, ended up actually running drugs for the Puerto Rican mafia. So I was running drugs up and down the East Coast. Got involved in homosexuality, got involved in pornography, got involved in all the kinds of things that you can, eating disorders, domestic violence, any kind of thing that you could imagine, I was involved in. And I was just trying to numb that feeling of shame, that worthlessness that I felt. And so I was living this lifestyle, bartending and running drugs out the back and seeing my friends die and, just getting tired of the chaos that was in that life. And so I went to my local newspaper, which I'm dating myself a little bit, but went to my newspaper looking for a job and saw that a local women's clinic was hiring. And they were looking for a receptionist. And I thought, okay, that's something I can do, answer the phones. I don't have really any skills other than bartending and drug dealing, but surely I can answer the phone and do that. So I went to the address that was on the newspaper ad, and it was where I'd had my abortion. And I walked in and applied and got hired on the spot as the reception at this abortion facility. Now, this was over 20 years ago. And at that time, as a receptionist, they hired me making $18 an hour.
which
which
was
is
pretty
really
good money
now
yeah
for a receptionist.
you bet.
But then that was incredible. So when they told me to do things like edit magazines, which meant we would take the magazines that were in the reception area and any pictures of happy couples or minivans or an engagement ring, anything that might cue that maternal instinct in that woman, we would cut those pictures out. In the state of Virginia,
literally just tear them out of the magazines. They're just gone.
Literally, we didn't want anything to make them change their minds.
Wow.
And the guys, because in the state of Virginia at that time, there was a 24-hour waiting period. So guys would often come for that first appointment. And when they would come for the consultation appointment, everybody would come at the same time. We would take all the ladies back, show them a 3-minute video, give them some paperwork, and then, do a few things and then send them out. And so all the guys would be in the waiting room together. And when the girls would leave, we would turn the air conditioning very, very cold or the heat very, very hot, because we wanted the guys to get up and leave. And when these women would come out from their consultation, we would say to her, sweetheart, if he won't even support you for this appointment, what makes you think he'll support you for a child?
No. Wow.
Absolutely.
What incredible manipulation.
Absolutely. And, it's funny because this has been so many years ago, your memory. And at that time when I was working there, I was still heavily using drugs. I was still heavily drinking. And so oftentimes you're like, really happen? Did that actually really happen?
Yes.
I was speaking at an event in Ohio last year, 2 years ago. And at the end of the event, a man came up to me and he said, thank you so much for sharing your story. I was stationed in Virginia and my girlfriend got pregnant and I took her to your facility to have an abortion. And I can remember getting up and leaving because it was so cold I couldn't sit in that waiting room. And I've felt bad because I left her and went outside.
Wow.
So I know, and if you look at the reviews for this facility, it talks about how we treated the men and stuff.
Yes,
so,
that is
it was
so emblematic of the deception that is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The foundation.
Manipulation and coercion, 100%. So that was the front part that what I would do. I also dispensed Valium. As the receptionist. I also gave out the chemical abortion as the receptionist. The other part of my job was the recovery room.
Okay.
So the facility that I worked at, 99% of our appointments were sedation appointments. For $25 more, you could get a twilight sedation, which if people don't know what a twilight sedation is, if you've ever had oral surgery, if you've ever had like knee surgery or a colonoscopy, it's the sedation that they give you where you are awake, but you're not really cognizant. You're in kind of a dreamy state, but you are fully awake. And so after that sort of a sedation, there are certain things that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to check blood pressure. You're supposed to check their heart rate. You're supposed to, all of these kinds of things. As the receptionist, my job was 20 minutes after they came off of the table to walk into the room, give them their juice, give them a cookie, give them a bag with their clothes, their birth control, and release them out the door without ever checking any of their vitals, making sure that they were okay. And the number of women that we saw hemorrhaging in that recovery room is what caused me to leave. Now, when those women were hemorrhaging, what we would do, and some of your listeners may have seen the movie Unplanned, what we would do is we would take those women back to the procedure room, give them more of the sedation, and we would release them and fix whatever we'd done wrong. And we would release them without ever telling them what had happened during that procedure.
Wow.
So if their bowel had been perforated, their cervix had been perforated, any of those sorts of things, we would not tell them what had happened. We would also not give them any follow-up protocol. Come back in 6 weeks. Let's make sure everything's okay. Follow up with your OBGYN. Make sure that everything's okay. Hey, just to let you know, this happened. It was a complication during your procedure. You need to look out for A, B, and C. None of that was given to them. And so because of that, I actually went and looked at my file to see if that had happened to me. Because one of the things about this sedation is you have no memory of your experience.
Oh my
and so these women would never know that this happened to them. And I recognize that we weren't just ending their pregnancies that day, but for many of these women, we were ending the potential for them ever getting pregnant, ever becoming mothers. And I started to see the coercion, and people will say, Kelly, why would you, cut out magazines? Why would you turn on the heat? Why would you do those things? Like, that's so manipulative, so coercive. But it was phrased to me as, Kelly, you of all people know how hard this decision is. And we want to make it as easy as possible for her. And I'm like, yes, it is a hard decision. Yes, we want to make this easy for her. It also didn't hurt that they were paying me $18 an hour.
Exactly.
And so the combination of those factors.
Yes. Layer upon layer of manipulation.
Absolutely.
I'm also wondering,
Absolutely.
so, I mean, do you, in your experience, did you see true informed consent for these? I mean, if they were not even told about the complication that had happened, they're not receiving informed consent.
No. Informed consent in the abortion industry is a piece of paper where they initial down the line. That is informed consent. There are words on there that I guarantee you the women don't understand. I tell people that when you get those kinds of forms, how often do you read them? How often do you ask, unless you're a lawyer, 99.9% of people don't actually read them, don't actually ask questions if it's something that they don't understand. Now imagine you are a woman in crisis.
Yeah.
Now imagine that you're a woman in crisis who is terrified about what is about to happen to her.
And your support person is missing.
And your support person is missing, or worse, pushing you to do this.
Yes, that is worse. You're right.
How are you getting conformed? I testify for pro-life legislation all over the country, and informed consent is one of my big buzzwords. And because I'm thinking, okay, surely, regardless of what side of the aisle you're in, you think that women should understand what's happening to their body, her choice, right? She should understand what's happening to her body. The pro-abortion side in those cases, their testimony has been, and I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't witnessed it myself, that women are unable to understand what is on these consent forms. Women are unable to understand the language that we as pro-lifers are wanting to give them. And because they are unable to understand that, we should not be giving them this information because it's only going to confuse them.
How demeaning.
How
Incredibly demeaning to women.
Yet again, showing that abortion is not healthcare. Because we're not too dumb to understand what a mastectomy is, or what a hysterectomy is, or what all the millions of other procedures that we have to get done are. We're not too dumb to understand that, but we are too dumb to understand abortion and the procedures. And the definition of informed consent is you have to give it to me in a way that I understand.
Yes.
So if I'm unable to understand it, then I cannot consent to it. The other problem was for us, the majority of the time the women were filling out that paperwork, they had already taken Valium.
Yeah, talk to me about that. Yeah, because you mentioned that kind of briefly, and I wanted to steer you back to that. It's like, it sounds like that's like standard course of action that you're passing out this, like it's candy. What did that do to the women who ingested that?
It's a whole thing. So when they would come in, we would take their ID, we would take their money, and the very next thing I would do is hand them a cup with water with Valium. Okay. Then they would take their form, they would take their Valium, take the water, they would sit down and fill out the forms, their consent forms, basically.
After taking the Valium.
After taking the Valium.
Okay.
There were times where these women would come back up to the counter and they would say, you know what? I don't think I want to do this. I've changed my mind. I don't want to do this. And I would have the nurse come out, and the nurse would say to them, we've given you a medication. And so because we've given you this medication, we are unable to allow you to leave for 2 hours. We have to monitor you for 2 hours. So we're going to need you to sit in the waiting room for 2 hours. And then 20, 30 minutes later, after the Valium has kicked in, the nurse would come back out and say, sweetheart, we've already got everything we need. You've already paid. Let's go ahead and take care of this for you.
Horrifying.
What's interesting is after taking the sedation for this sedation appointment, which is not a Valium, it is a mixture of fentanyl and other very intense narcotics. 20 minutes after that, we would release them out the door. because we'd already gotten what we wanted.
So it was a lie. It was, I mean, it shouldn't
All a
surprise
lie.
me. This industry is built upon lies.
All a lie. Yeah, all a lie, all coercion. I talk to people about the medical aspect of it. Our prescription forms were already pre-filled out in the room where you go through the parts. We would
The parts of the baby. The parts of the baby. Yes.
So in there, there was a checklist that you would look at what the contents of the uterus that come out, and you would make sure, head, arms, make sure that all the parts are there and sign off on it. I fortunately never had to do that actual piece. I'd gone in that room, but never done that piece. And then the nurse is supposed to then take that to the doctor. The doctor is supposed to look at that file. Yes, everything's here. Just do a quick check. Yes, everything's there, because that's how you make sure that the contents of her uterus are no longer there. Make sure the baby's out. Those were all pre-signed, pre-filled out. And so there was no checkup to make sure that she wasn't going to become septic or become, get infection or any of these things. Because everything, anywhere where a corner could be cut or something could be overlooked or bypassed, we did it.
To maximize profit and expediency.
Maximize profit and time.
Yes.
To maximize time and profit, yeah. And the doctor was typically in with the patient. The goal was to be under 5 minutes. 5 minutes was the absolute limit. And at that point, she is already in the stirrups. She is already sedated. There's no more between a woman and her doctor. There was no asking the doctor questions. There was none of that. She is in the stirrups, ready to go. He comes in, does a procedure, washes his hands, hopefully, goes to the next room, does a procedure, washes his hands, hopefully, goes to the next room. And oftentimes those hopefullys don't happen.
Wow.
As bad as people think it is, it's far worse.
It's just breaking. My heart is breaking.
Yeah.
And the other part that caught me in your story of, your personal experience at the very beginning, you were 15 and
I was.
There was no parental notification. It sounds like this was, you were alone, just alone. And,
totally.
If you had been given the support you needed, how much different could this, just years of repercussions been so different, since I know that there was so much in your story and the trauma, and you needed a lot of support that you did not receive. You were given what was sold to you as a quick, easy answer. And I mean, tell me, was it the quick, easy answer that you were sold?
Well, no, of course not. And worse than that, before I actually worked at the abortion industry, I had a second abortion. I had a chemical abortion. And as traumatic as the first one was at 15, the chemical abortion was far more traumatic.
Really?
And I wanted to do the chemical because my surgical experience was not good. And so I'm like, all right, I don't want to do that again. And it was sold to me as, this is basically like just restarting your period. It's no big deal. It'll be quick. It'll be easy. It'll be painless. And it was significantly cheaper. And that was honestly a big thing for me, was the cost benefit of doing it that way.
And we hear all the time from the abortion industry that it's quote unquote safer than Tylenol, right?
Yes. It's just like a heavy period. It's, a missed period pill, they'll call it. They'll just restart your period. But that experience, because my first abortion, the guilt and the shame was from knowing what I had done, but I don't have any memory of the actual procedure. I don't remember that actual, thankfully, because I know women who do, and it's horrific. However, the chemical abortion, I remember everything. I remembered the entire procedure. I had to turn and decide whether I was going to flush or not to be graphic, but that's the reality of it. I had to, deal with the heavy cramping, heavy bleeding for 48 hours, not able to leave the bathroom because I thought I was going to die. And then for 6 weeks after that, the intense pain, the bleeding, the cramping, wondering if I was ever going to be right again. And the shame and the guilt and the trauma of the actual experience was so intense that I actually moved from the apartment that I was living in because I didn't want to have to relive that every single time I went back to the
Yes,
bathroom.
I've never thought of that before. Just the
Oh, yeah.
association with the place would
Absolutely.
be
And
so
at least with
traumatizing.
the surgical, it was the building across town that I never go to that area, but it was my home. It was not being done to me by a doctor. It was me doing it to myself. So there was a whole other level of shame and guilt.
Yes.
Isolation, being alone by yourself. It's not privacy, it's secrecy, being alone with no support. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And then seeing my baby in the toilet, and having to deal, with that visual imagery. And so that was even far more traumatic. And people will ask me, after having those two experiences, why would you go work in the abortion industry? Which is a great question. But I assumed I was the only one that had those experiences. Because if my experience was normal, then we would hear about it. We would know, there would be more people talking about how horrible it was but I wasn't hearing that anywhere. And so I assumed that I must have been the only one that had those experiences, and really believed on many levels that I deserved those experiences, that it was like a payment for my sin kind of a thing. It was a punishment for my sin. And so there was a part of me that thought that that was the way it should be for me, that I should have had it that way. But I didn't know that it was the norm for everybody, or not everybody, but for many people, until I worked in the abortion industry. And I saw that it was, in fact, I wasn't the rarity, I was the norm. And honestly, even had a better experience than many women, which is terrifying to think.
Wow.
Because thankfully I've been able to have children. Thankfully I didn't have any complications other than the emotional side of it, where women do deal with incredible physical complications from it. So
why do you think that we don't hear more about how women are hurt by abortion?
there's a few reasons. One, because the abortion industry is not required to report it. That's a main reason. Most states, the state of Virginia, for instance, in 2018 removed all mandatory reporting and all mandatory inspections. So the only time the state of Virginia abortion facilities have to report is if there's a death. That is pretty consistent across many states, that there's no reporting. And so because of that, we're not hearing the numbers that way. The other side is because women are ashamed of what's happening and what has happened to them. The other side is they're not being told. So if they are perforated, or if there is that thing, they're not being told that this happens to them. And many of them don't realize that anything happened until years down the road, when they try to have children and find out that there's scarring all over their, your uterus or cervix, and haven't, on the form with their OBGYN, haven't checked, yes, I had an abortion. And so there's all of these things because of that. There's also the piece in the recovery room. I can tell you that it did not matter whether women came in shouting their abortion, or they came in completely conflicted about the decision they were about to make. In the recovery room, every single woman was sad. It is the saddest place on earth, because there is that knowing of what you have done. And you may be able, after the fact, to be able to justify it, and this was the best. But in that moment, you recognize that you are a mother who has killed their child. But the abortion industry has said that abortion is empowering, and abortion is the best thing. Women need abortion. That's the tagline that's out there now. And so if I, as a woman, feel sorrow, or I feel shame, or I feel regret, I don't feel like I have the right to feel that, because I've been told this is the best thing for you. This is the best thing for your family. This is the best thing for your children or your future children. This is the best thing for your career. And so when I feel those feelings, I stuff them down and I don't allow them to come out. And they often come out in anger. They come out in rage, which is what we are seeing across this country. Those women yelling and cussing and wearing the pink hats and, with the crazy shirts, I guarantee you that the majority of those women have suffered the trauma of an abortion experience and don't know what to do with that emotion, because it didn't feel empowering in the moment, and so they turn that to anger. And so because of those reasons, the other issue is, in our emergency rooms, our coding system does not allow for complications from abortion. And so that messes up things where our emergency rooms are not even reporting when women are coming in from a botched abortion or coming in from complications from a chemical abortion, which they are being told to do. They're being told also, another piece, women who take the chemical abortion are being told if there is a complication to go to the emergency room and tell them that they are having a miscarriage.
I have heard that before. I was going to ask you that. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so because of that, there's how do you report that it's an abortion if you're being told that it's a miscarriage and there's no way to test and tell that it's coming from a chemical abortion. So you add all of those factors, and that's why we're not seeing or hearing what we should be seeing. That's why the reports are so skewed. That's why everything is so, and women just have shame. You know, it's not even as public as it's become and as widely as accepted as it's become. Nobody wants to be known for their worst decision or their worst moment. And that ultimately is what an abortion is. And so because of that, you're just not hearing very many women talk about it.
Wow. This is such a powerful look inside the abortion industry that, you know, if it helps so much to understand just the deep depravity that is there at the very core of that industry, and to hear how women are just sold lie upon lie upon lie, and just to understand why our culture is so broken from this. They're literally being instructed to lie if they need follow-up care. And I also understand that they're instructed to not come back to the abortion facility for any kind of complications or any kind of aftercare. They just say, nope, go straight in. Rather than in a normal medical situation, the doctor is instructed, you must follow your patient, right? So if you're the one who causes the harm, then it is your responsibility to fix that harm. But and this is like the one case where if they have this complication, this harm from that procedure, don't come back here. We don't want to see you again. You just go straight to the emergency room, which also...
And lie to them about what happened.
And lie to them about what happened.
What doctor would do that?
Exactly. So,
which shows again that it's not medical care. That's yet again proving that point, you know. And, and I think it's important for people to understand, you know, when you're on the side of the pro-life, you know, and for many people who've never been on the side, you know, on the other side, it's really hard to even understand how workers and how those people can do that, you know. But you have to understand that as much as we on the pro-life side believe that abortion harms women, people on the pro-abortion side truly believe, and I know this is hard to understand, but they truly believe that abortion helps women. And so you have to, as much as we can understand that, which you can't, but you have to frame all of your conversations with people around that. You have to frame your marketing. You know what I mean? We have to understand that people really believe that. And that's why they do what they do. That's the only way that you can walk into the abortion industry every day and see what you see and do what you do, because you actually believe that it helps women, and that for many of these women, it's the best thing for them. And usually that's because you have your own trauma. You know, you've had your own trauma experience, you've had your own abortion experience. And then there were none. We have over 680 workers who have quit the industry and come to our ministry.
That's amazing.
Every single one of them has childhood trauma. Every one of them. And so you look at that and you think, well, you know, it's not a far cry. Hurt people hurt people. You're trying to justify your own hurt. That was me. I was trying to justify my own abortion experience, you know? And so those people that work in the industry, and that even don't work on the industry, but are on that pro-choice side, many of them really believe the lies that they are saying.
Yeah,
so we have to just pray.
They've been fed this steady diet of propaganda. And it's not coming just from the abortion industry. It's coming from a whole panel of allies. I mean, you look at all these celebrities now that are pushing abortion and selling it as the key to women's freedom, the key to a woman achieving her dreams, the key to happiness. And yet
Yes.
that every single one of those things is built on the lie, but it's coming from all different directions, especially young women who are living 4 to 5 hours a day that they're spending on social media and just constantly being barraged with this, just being pummeled with all this steady stream of pro-abortion propaganda. So of course, I
Yeah.
mean, you know that so many people would fall prey to that, especially like you're saying. I think that your description is it makes so much sense that, hurt people, even with the best intentions, they don't
Yes.
realize the harm that they continue to perpetuate. It's almost like an abused child who becomes an abuser.
Exactly.
It's never that, I guess it's a sense of normalcy about it or trying to establish. I can't explain all the mechanisms there, but what you're saying makes so much sense. Okay, so now that we've kind of followed your journey there, take us
Yes.
to the point where you had this awakening moment and you're like,
Yeah.
I cannot do this anymore. And what
Yeah.
the rest of the story looks like.
Yeah, for me, it was more of a gradual thing. It was seeing, my eyes being open to the reality of what we were actually doing, realizing that we were not actually helping women, which is what I went there to do. Realizing that it was more chaos. I was trying to leave a life of chaos, and I was not leaving that, And so it was kind of a gradual thing. I ended up leaving, did continue down a bad path. It wasn't like I had this, some people have that big, wide-eyed moment. I didn't then. It took several more years. I actually had 2 more abortions even after that because I was lost and still confused and still using drugs and, domestic violence and all of the things. And was living in New Orleans with a boyfriend, and it was a very violent relationship. And we decided that it was time for me to come home. It wasn't working out. And so we went out to celebrate me coming home, got into a fight, which was very typical. He comes home several hours later. I come home. The fight intensifies. And there was a moment where we had ripped the door off the door frame, and there was a 2x4 laying on the ground, or a 1x4 laying on the ground. And he pushes me on the ground. He's kneeling over top of me. He picks up the board and he goes to swing and hit me over the head with the board. Mid-swing, he drops the board. He punches me in the face several times, and my face just absolutely explodes. And blood goes everywhere. And he, it's like, oh gosh, I've actually really hurt her. And so the fight stops. And then the next morning I wake up and I have text messages and phone calls from my father in Virginia, 1,200 miles away. I didn't answer them because your dad is the last person you want to talk to after a night like that. But then 24 hours later, I got in my U-Haul with all my belongings and came back to Virginia. And my dad meets me. My eyes are, swollen shut. I could barely see. My nose was flat. My mouth was all busted. And he gets out of the car and sees me. And as soon as he does, he starts to cry. And I said, Dad, I was in a car accident, what women say in that kind of a situation. And he looks and he says, Kelly, 2 nights ago, I was asleep. And in the middle of the night, the Lord woke me up and I had a vision of you laying dead on the floor with your head split wide open. And so I began to pray. And so I recognized that the moment when my boyfriend had dropped that board was the moment when my father, 1,200 miles away, had woken and prayed for me. I didn't tell him that, but several weeks later, I'm healed up. I'm sitting in the front row of my dad's church because my dad was a pastor. And he gives the altar call. And I'm sitting there, I got the butterflies in my stomach. And then I hear, as clearly as I've ever heard anything, I hear the Lord speak to me and he says, have you had enough? And I had always expected God to be mad at me, angry with me, like he was waiting to just strike me with lightning. But this was not the voice that I heard. It was my dad. It was my Father God crying out to me, his daughter who had been gone, the prodigal daughter, begging me to come home. And I said, but God, how could you ever forgive me, for all of the things that I've done and all the things that have been done to me? And he said, if you follow me, I will make beauty from ashes, which is Isaiah 61, which I didn't know that, although I grew up in the church, I never read my Bible. So I didn't know that. But that is literally what he has done everywhere that the enemy meant to steal, kill, and destroy. God has saved, healed, redeemed, and restored. And one of the ways that he does that is through me telling my story. And so I went through, now this has been a process. This was not instant, over 10 years of healing and getting in the word and getting married and, all of those things. And then I started working at a pregnancy resource center, and was sharing my story some there. And then this movie came out called Unplanned. And I had shared my story of the abuse, of the violence, of the abortions, but I had never really shared my story of working in the abortion industry. Because the few times that I did that, people would look at me like, that's the unpardonable sin. We don't know what to do with that. And so I didn't share it. But I knew that that was an area that I needed healing, but I didn't know how to go about doing it because I never met anybody who'd worked in the abortion industry. So this movie Unplanned comes out, and I'm sitting in the movie theater hosting this movie, watching myself on the screen. And I thought, oh my goodness, I need to reach out to them. But life is crazy. And so I didn't. That came out until the March for Life, January of 2020. And I went to the March for Life with my team from the Pregnancy Center. And Abby and the team from And Then There Were None were doing a coffee with quitters. And I went up to them and said, hey guys, I think I'm one of you guys, and they welcomed me with open arms. And because of COVID, my entrance got delayed a little bit, but in October, I went to my first healing retreat. And then I started volunteering with Pro Love Ministries, another one of our organizations, helping women with the crisis line. And then in February, came on staff, February of 2021. And other than Abby, I was the first former worker to work for And Then There Were None. And now travel the country, sharing my story, testifying for pro-life legislation, working with sidewalk advocates here in our local area. And so truly God has literally redeemed and restored every aspect of my story. And when I share it, there's things where you can't make beautiful being molested at 3. But when I get to share my story and give hope to a woman who's experienced, or man who's experienced that makes my story beautiful. The years of walking away from the Lord can't make beautiful that, except when there's a parent in the audience who says, my child's lost and I'm praying for my child, and it gives them hope. That makes my story beautiful. And so that's kind of leads us to where we are now.
Yes, and I completely agree. What a beautiful testimony.
Thanks.
Just powerful, 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 powerful. Wow. It's amazing seeing God at work, and it gives us all so much hope to hear from you and to hear that that the organization is doing such a fantastic job of connecting former workers of the abortion industry and giving women an access to a way out of it. I also understand is, part of your mission is to connect them with real jobs in the community that, $18 an hour was there was a reason that it was such a high wage. They knew that, I'm sure that they probably have a hard time keeping people in those positions. And so they lure people with that money. That's, of course, all funded from those abortions that they're selling. And
Yes.
but hearing, it helps so much to have a lot more compassion. Of course, I mean, the pro-life movement is the side of this debate that has compassion, true compassion for women. And, we want to help every woman who is facing that unexpected or difficult pregnancy. But this we want to have compassion where there's amazing ministries that help women who have experienced abortion and have had the trauma that results from it. So, such a amazing thing. So one thing I'm going to pivot really quickly to just
Sure.
a totally separate topic, but I feel like you could give such. I'm very curious about your take on this because we heard about Vice President Kamala Harris recently going on the campaign trail to literally visit an abortion facility, a facility that is. That's what they do. They sell abortions. And this was her campaign stop. I mean, we're not talking about what we typically see on a campaign trail. In fact, it was the first time that any president or vice president has ever gone to an abortion facility as part of their tour. So I'm curious, what's your take on that?
I think the fact that our vice president is going to Planned Parenthood instead of going to our border, or instead of going to, Ohio, where the water issue was, there's all kinds of places that our vice president could be going and actually helping people. But the fact that they've gone to Planned Parenthood, it doesn't surprise me. The fact that Kate Cox was the guest at our State of the Union address from the First Lady. Kate Cox was the mother in Texas who was moved out of state so that she could abort her baby who had a diagnosis of trisomy 18. That's where our president and vice president's focus are. And it doesn't surprise me, but it does concern me, because we no longer can just sit back and not do anything. We have to be proactive. I'm going to be at the Supreme Court for the FDA case with Alliance Defending Freedom against the first part of the chemical abortion. I'm going to continue doing that. But where we are actually going to see people change is with our culture, with hearts and minds. And we have to change hearts and minds of individuals. And one of the ways that we need to do that is with education. One of the ways that we need to be doing that is by sharing stories like mine, sharing stories of other women who have had these experiences, talking to our young people about the realities of abortion. We actually have a website called little.pillsthatkill.com. And on that website, you will hear stories of, you'll hear like taglines like safe as a Tylenol. And then former workers like myself will share their experience, what they were told to say and what they actually experienced. And so it's a great resource for the community, because chemical abortion, we know, is at least 58%, probably closer to 70% of the abortions that are happening. Kansas is a state where you guys are pretty wide open, but a lot of other states, abortion is illegal, but they're still doing the abortion pill, and so we need to be educating people on the realities of abortion, and we need to be educating people on the options, that there are pregnancy resource centers out there, that there are, organizations like Pro-Love Ministries and Loveline that are there to support women, both financially and with material goods. That there are Young Lives that'll walk with college students so that they can continue in college. And so as the pro-life movement, we need to be educating ourselves on what the resources are for these women and finding where there are gaps for these resources.
Yes.
But yeah,
we have some amazing,
telling.
Yeah, just like you're saying, we have some amazing resources here in our state. We've got over 50 pregnancy resource centers that are actively supporting women. We have there's a program called Walking with Moms in Need, where women are actually paired up with a core of support, basically a support team, or a couple women who walk alongside them and help them in any way they need. Yes, and kind of going back to what you were saying about Kamala Harris, the other thing that I noticed that I want to make sure I drop in here, we continue to hear that this just goes along with all of the layers of euphemism and propaganda and lies. They continue to use this line where they conflate standard medical care for miscarriages with abortions. They want people to believe that somehow basic medical care for a woman who is suffering a true miscarriage is somehow threatened, which is ridiculous. So they're not bound by the truth. They don't have, those kind of rails where they think, oh, well, we need to make sure that we always speak truthfully. We always give accurate information. The people on the pro-abortion side are not bound by truth. And I guess that should not shock us, but it is so important that we get more vocal so that people hear the truth. And I applaud you so much for what you're doing. I think that you are one of the most important voices on this topic, because you can talk from a place of knowledge and experience from within the abortion industry. So
yeah, an interesting thing about the miscarriage, I've always thought it interesting that a miscarriage is one of the things that they're like, women won't get miscarriage care. But yeah, when women are suffering a complication, what do they tell them to say when they go to the emergency room? That they're having a miscarriage. Isn't that interesting? Interesting.
That is interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is telling people not to go to the emergency room. So it's, the whole thing. But, we're in it this fight is not over. And, I appreciate your organization and all that you all do, and the organizations that you guys rally. And, if I can be changed, if my heart can change and my mind can change and I can become the advocate that I am, there's no one whose heart can't be changed. And so don't lose hope, and for me, there was no one standing on the sidewalk giving me options other than abortion. There was no one standing there giving me resources or saying, hey, there's a community that's going to come alongside of you. There were people calling me a murderer, but there was no one giving me help. And so, now that we know better and we are doing better, have hope that we will see women change their mind and we will see lives saved, both the moms and the babies. And so keep doing what you're doing out there. Don't give up. I know it's hard for many places. I'm in Virginia, so it feels like we are not winning, but we know who wins in the end, and just keep fighting the fight.
Yep, you're so right. That actually leads perfectly into my close. I just want to say thank you for coming on and for sharing your story. I know we're going to see much more of you, hear much more from you, and we applaud what you're doing. So on behalf of Cancers for Life, thank you to you. And also, thank you to our listeners. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. This was obviously a really important podcast. So if you believe that the right to life is essential and worth fighting for, and you want to make a difference, please share this podcast with others. You can stay connected with us by visiting kfl.org and signing up to receive our updates. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok at Cansins for Life. If you want to drop us a line by email, please send it to kfl@kfl.org. Let us know what you think of the podcast. What would you like to see more of? What guest you would want to see come on and share more stories like this and other ideas that you'd like to share? And as we say goodbye, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Truth always wins in the end. We hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.